Good afternoon, everyone. Time for another halftime talk. As you can see, I am sitting in my car creating this one, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to spend some time together and maybe make the most of my time in the middle of the week, and just in between places and meetings and obligations. And so I wanted to take some time and just encourage you at this moment. And so we've been in the middle of a series at Church Triumphant. The series we've been preaching on Sunday morning is this: life is hard, period, but God is. And trying to unveil the fact that none of us get exemptions. All of us go through hard times. All of us go through difficulty. Jesus would express that to us in John 16:33. But in the middle of that, we need to remember who He is. And I'm trying to unveil different characteristics and thoughts, maybe some ideas about Him that you don't normally think through or think about. Last week we talked about life is hard, God is compassionate, so come near. And I want to encourage you today that when you're in a hard time, and you're, like I said a couple weeks ago, you're either coming out of a hard time, in the middle of a hard time, or heading into a hard time, most likely. And so one of the worst things you can do in the hard time is to draw away from God and draw away from the community of faith, and that God is near us even in our difficulty. He never leaves, never forsakes us, but we draw away from Him, and oftentimes we draw away from the people who God placed in our lives to get us through. And so the worst thing you can do is doubt the compassion of God, doubt the compassion of that He's placed in the hearts of the community of faith, and pull away from that. I do appreciate some of us need time of isolation to process and think, but the fact of the matter is many of us stay isolated for too long and never allow the people God's given certain gifts, talents, and life experience and understanding into where when we're having a difficult time. So please, life is hard. God is compassionate. He's placed His own compassion in the hearts of His people. So come near Him, come near us, and allow us to be an agent in your life of healing. And that's what He wants to be. He wants to bring healing to the difficulty. As we approach this next coming Sunday, I want to encourage you about another thing I've been thinking. And this is this: life is hard, but God is faithful. So live a life of worship. And I want you to think about a story as we prepare for Sunday that's found in the Old Testament. I won't be using this Sunday morning, but I think it's relevant to make you start thinking the right thoughts. There's a story in 2 Chronicles chapter 20 about King Jehoshaphat of the little nation of Judah after the nation of Israel split in two. The King David's family took rulership and stayed over the tribe of Judah, and they became their own separate nation while Israel went off on its own path. And King Jehoshaphat is the king, and he's a really good king. But he forgets how faithful God is, and he thinks he can rely on human agency. And so in a couple chapters before 2 Chronicles chapter 20, he makes a pact with King Ahab of Israel, and God has to remind him, listen, I'm the one who's faithful. I'm more faithful than any human being will ever be. And he has to do some things to realign Jehoshaphat's focus. And King Ahab dies. And then in 2 Chronicles 20, you'll find that all the nations around the nation of Judah have come against them. Five different nations. And King Jehoshaphat is distraught. The people of Judah are distraught. And he cries out. And one of the things he does is he reminds God of the faithfulness that God has shown. He's reminded himself and God. And so he's like, God, you've done things for us. You've placed us in this land. You helped us overcome. Are you going to leave us high and dry this time? And as he's reminding himself of the faithfulness of God and trying to implement worship, a word sent to him that, listen, this battle is God's, it's not yours. God is going to show Himself faithful. And so worship God in spite of the difficulty, in the face of the difficulty. And so King Jehoshaphat does something kind of crazy. He doesn't send the best warriors out in the front of the battle. He puts the people with instruments and worship who can lead them in worship of God and remind the nation of Israel the faithfulness of God. And they march out to battle with these instrument players in front of them, these singers in front of them. And the Bible tells us that in that moment, God set ambushment, some translations say, against the enemies of the nation of Judah. And by the time they arrive, they find that their enemies have slaughtered themselves. They're all dead. The battlefield is strewn with dead bodies, but the nation of Judah didn't have to do anything. God showed Himself faithful on their behalf because they decided to worship with their whole beings, even putting their life on the line to worship God. And so I want to encourage you today. You may be in a hard time. Things may be difficult. But I want to remind you, God's brought you through much. He has been faithful, and He will be faithful. The Scriptures tell us that the person of Jesus, He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so if He's been faithful before, He'll be faithful again. And so let me encourage you. Life is hard. God is faithful. So live a life of worship and see what happens. Watch God show Himself faithful again and again and again. Don't be afraid to worship through the difficulty, in the face of the difficulty, and see what happens. Put your life in front of Jesus. Say, God, do what you want. I trust you. I trust you in your faithfulness. Help me. Be with me. Show yourself strong, and I guarantee you He will. Life is hard. God is faithful. Live a life of worship. I hope you'll join us Sunday at Church T, 10 a.m. for the next installment of Life is Hard. God is. God is faithful. Have a great week. I hope this has encouraged you. I pray that in the difficulty you're in, you're worshiping Jesus. I'll talk to you later.